The return home, the train ride from Pittsburgh to New York, had been long, quiet, and filled with a strange kind of anticipation. I stared out the window at the rolling fields and the sparse clusters of houses. But my mind wasn't on the scenery. It was on home. My home. The house I'd built with my husband. Room by room. Nail by nail. Memory by memory. I hadn't been away for long, just 3 weeks, but the thought of returning had been gnawing at me every night I lay in my sister's guest room. Marjorie had fallen, badly enough that she couldn't even stand without help. So I went, as a sister should. I cooked her soup, washed her hair, and folded towels, all the while thinking about what I'd come back to. My garden, my creaky rocking chair, the cedar chest in my bedroom, little things I'd never realized I'd miss so much until I couldn't touch them. I pictured the lavender scent in the hallway, the gentle sunlight spilling across the living room floor, the quiet hum of the refrigerator that had become a constant in the background of my life. I didn't expect, however, what hit me when I first opened my front door. It wasn't lavender. It wasn't the soft smell of fresh flowers. It was burning sage. Thick, suffocating, acrid smoke that clawed its way into my nose and throat. And then I heard her voice, Clarice, my son's wife, clear, sharp, and triumphant. "This is my house now," she said, swirling a glass of wine in her hand as her friends giggled behind her. "The old lady just lives in my husband's memory. And even that's fading." I stopped. I froze. I had to blink twice to make sure I was really there. The living room. The hallway, everything was quiet. Almost eerily so. Their laughter carried, rich and cruel, bouncing off the walls that had once held decades of my life. My bedroom sanctuary had been transformed. Gone were my quilts, my photographs, my cherished nightstand, replaced with white and gold throw pillows, faux fur blankets, and a ridiculous sign above the bed that read, "His enters manifestation space." Clarice stood there like a queen in her newly conquered kingdom, offering mimosas to her brunch friends. We saged the room to get her sent out, she said, as though erasing my presence was a form of art. One of her friends whispered, almost to herself, "She's like a ghost, wandering around in slippers." Another joked about my dentures, as if I were already gone. I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I just stepped back, suitcase in hand, and walked quietly past them. My heart was hammering, but I refused to let it betray me. The couch, stiff, floral, uncomfortable, was my new bedroom. I laid there that night, curled beneath a thin afghan that barely reached my knees. I could hear them laughing down the hallway, their voices dripping with mockery. My room glowed under the soft light of lavender candles, the smell of sage lingering like a cruel reminder that my place in my own home had been stolen. The next morning, Clarice handed me a bottle of green juice. "Brunch starts at 11:00. Try not to be seen." Okay. My friends are into minimalism. Minimalism. The word lingered in the air, like it had been chosen specifically to make me feel small, as if my very existence could be minimized, reduced to nothing. I walked to the backyard and sat beside my dying hydrangeas. The hose was bone dry. The garden had been neglected while I was away. And I whispered softly, "I'm still here." But even the flowers seemed unsure if I belonged. That evening, I noticed a note on the refrigerator. "No fridge items after 7:00 p.m. Intermittent fasting hours." And underneath, in childish Sharpie handwriting, "Residents only." It was then I realized they didn't just want me out of the house. They wanted me erased. Erased from memory, from history, from the walls themselves. But ghosts don't fatten not if they remember who they are. And I remembered. I remembered every nail my husband hammered, every flower we planted, the night my son was born in that very room that Clarice had now defiled. I remembered every act of love, every quiet act of devotion that had made this house mine. I also remembered something else, something powerful. Cruelty doesn't arrive with a scream. It creeps in quietly, wearing a smile, small acts of dismissal, subtle erasures. The morning after their brunch, I tried to log onto the Wi-Fi to check an email from my sister. Password changed. "Oh," Clarice said casually, "we reset it while you were gone. It's for residents only now." as if I were some tenant on a temporary lease. Milk in the refrigerator had a neon pink sticky note. Not for seniors. Plant-based only. Seniors. Too old. Dispensable. My presence alone had become a disruption to their high-energy zone. I walked past the note slowly, my hands pressed against the cold refrigerator. Silence. I held it close to me like a shield, a reminder that I hadn't disappeared completely. It was during one of these quiet moments that my granddaughter, Natalie, saved me. She appeared in the living room dragging her stuffed bunny by one ear. Small, timid, brave. She handed me a tiny piece of fabric, the soft part of my old pillowcase that had been discarded. I thought you might still want it, she whispered. I held it to my chest and for the first time in weeks felt a trace of home. A fragment of love untouched by their cruelty. That night, I picked up the old brass lamp my husband had gifted me years ago. Ugly, heavy, ordinary to anyone else, but it held a secret. A latch beneath the base revealed a hidden silver disc and, pressed against it, a recording. His voice, Richard's voice, clear and commanding, filled the room. The moment she is made unwelcome in her home, verbally, physically, or symbolically, all secondary beneficiaries forfeit their claim. Full ownership transfers to her name with legal authority to remove any resident at will. I didn't shout. I didn't panic. I waited. 3 weeks of watching, enduring, and remembering had prepared me for this. I wasn't fading. I was waiting. Waiting for the right moment to reclaim what was mine. Gathering the evidence the first morning back in my home, though I technically didn't have one anymore, began with the same ritual ID observed for decades. Coffee in hand, I walked through the rooms quietly, tracing the edges of tables, the corners of walls, and the light filtering through the curtains. Everything had changed, but the house still carried whispers of the life ID built. A photograph here, a book there, my husband's favorite chair tucked in the corner. Small remnants, small truths, hiding in plain sight. Clarice had already started her daily routine of domination. She moved through the house like it was a stage, all smiles and fluid gestures, a wine glass perpetually balanced in one hand. My son, Aaron, sat glued to his phone, eyes glazed as though the chaos around him was part of a different universe. They didn't see me, or perhaps they chose not to. For a moment, I let them believe I had vanished entirely. But I hadn't. Not at all. I started with the lamp. My husband had always been a man who thought ahead. Richard had built our lives with care, with strategy, with love, but also with a touch of cleverness I hadn't fully appreciated until now. That lamp, a simple brass piece with a wobbly shade, contained a hidden silver disc. On it, Richard's voice had laid out a plan that would protect me, should anyone ever try to diminish my place in the world we had built together. I listened again, letting every word sink in. He had documented the trust, the estate, the clauses. He had foreseen this exact situation, not a guess. Not a vague precaution, but an ironclad legal pathway to reclaim what was mine. I pressed my hands to the lamp, feeling the weight of not just brass and metal, but of decades of love, foresight, and quiet defiance. Over the next few days, I began gathering evidence. Small things first. Sticky notes Clarice had carelessly left on counters, whispers of my granddaughter, screenshots of text messages, photos of rooms rearranged, and my personal belongings discarded. Every little act of erasure became a documented fact. I learned to move quietly, to watch, to record without confrontation. Clarice was unaware that her every smug smile, her every casual insult, was becoming part of the dossier that would soon undo her carefully curated life of positive energy and manifestation. The arrogance of assuming she could overwrite decades of memory with sage and pastel colors would be her downfall. Natalie, my granddaughter, became my unexpected ally. At 9 years old, she had already learned the power of observation. She slipped notes to me, small scraps of evidence or confessions overheard from Clarice. One afternoon, she handed me a torn piece of paper with her tiny scrawl. They threw away Grandma's quilt. Don't let them win. I pressed it to my heart. A small, tangible reminder that I wasn't alone. That love could still survive in the corners of a house filled with whispers and cruelty. I contacted Margaret Doyle, my husband's oldest colleague and one of the few people who had ever understood Richard's meticulous mind. I didn't call a lawyer in the usual sense. I didn't need to. Margaret had been a silent partner in Richard's vision for decades. She picked up on the first ring. "Ellaner," she said, voice both warm and sharp. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you." "I have something," I replied, holding the lamp tightly as though it were my lifeline. "Something Richard left behind. You need to hear it for yourself." I shipped the lamp to her desk. Wrapped simply, without fanfare. 2 days later, Margaret called me. Her voice carried a mixture of admiration and awe. "I always knew your husband was clever," she said. "But this is art." We began arranging the evidence. The package delivery codes, the emails, the screenshots, and the lamp became instruments in a precise choreography that would leave no room for dispute. Every act of cruelty by Clarice and Aaron had been recorded. Every dismissive gesture documented. Then came the formal process. Margaret and I sat in a small, quiet office, files laid out like a strategic map. Across from us, Clarice and Aaron appeared, unaware of the storm gathering. They were sure this was just another petty family dispute. They didn't know the law had been waiting silently, patiently, for the right moment to act. Margaret's voice was calm, precise. Clause 14b, also known as the Conduct Clause, states, "Any individual who knowingly subjects Ellaner Burn to verbal disparagement, emotional displacement, or involuntary eviction from the shared household shall forfeit all rights to inheritance and occupancy immediately and irrevocably." Clarice's eyes narrowed. "You can't be serious. This is ridiculous." "We are serious," Margaret replied. She slid a leather folder across the table. Inside were photos, video clips, screenshots, and the lamp itself a witness in brass and metal. The room fell silent as we began presenting evidence. There was the video of Clarice at her brunch, perched on my old bed, proclaiming, "This is my house now. The old lady just lives in my husband's memory. And even that's fading." Laughter from her friends echoed, cruel and dismissive. There were photos of my bedroom, my quilt replaced with white and gold, post-it notes scrawled with dismissive messages. Aaron shifted uneasily in his chair. The magnitude of what they had done, what they had assumed they could get away with, was beginning to sink in. Clarice tried to mask her panic with a scoff, but the evidence was overwhelming. Margaret placed the lamp in the center of the table. Its brass surface gleamed under the office lights. But it wasn't the shine of metal that carried weight. It was the voice hidden within the voice of Richard Allen Burn. The moment she is made unwelcome in her home, verbally, physically, or symbolically, Richard's voice declared, clear and commanding, all secondary beneficiaries forfeit their claim. Full ownership transfers to her name with legal authority to remove any resident at will. Even Clarice's bravest words faltered. Aaron's face drained of color. The truth, bound in law and foresight, had become a weapon far stronger than any scream or confrontation could ever be. For the first time in weeks, I felt the power shift. I was no longer the passive observer in my own home. I was the architect of its reclamation. Each act of evidence gathered, each whisper preserved, had built a fortress around my rights, my dignity, and my life. And yet, the storm was far from over. I had the law on my side, but there were still emotional battles to fight, the echoes of cruelty to face, and a house that had been filled with the illusion of a new order. Clarice and Aaron didn't just have to leave. They had to understand that the quiet strength of a life well lived couldn't be erased by candles, sage, or Instagram perfect brunches. That night, I stood by the window, lamp in hand, thinking of the life my husband and I had built. Small acts of love, persistence, and vision had created something that couldn't be stolen. The city lights twinkled below, indifferent yet comforting. I knew the days ahead would be challenging, but I had already won in a way they couldn't see. The evidence, the law, the memoirs were mine, and no one could take them away. Tomorrow, the formal hearing would begin. The courtroom would be silent, except for the voice of a man who had planned decades in advance. A man who had trusted me to carry forward his legacy. And I would. I wasn't fading. I was waiting, watching, and preparing to step back into a home that had always been mine. But more than that, I was preparing to step into a future where respect, dignity, and justice were no longer negotiable. The courtroom reckoning the courthouse smelled of polished wood and faint perfume, the kind that reminded me of mornings long past, when life felt ordered and safe. I entered quietly, dressed in navy and gray, my hair pinned back neatly, and a sense of calm radiating from within me. The courtroom buzzed with muted anticipation, but I didn't need to glance at Clarice or Aaron to know the fear lurking behind their carefully maintained facades. Clarice's heels clicked nervously against the marble floor. Her smile, once sharp and confident, now trembled at the edges. Aaron sat beside her, slouched, scrolling furiously on his phone, as though the small screen could shield him from the consequences that had been inching toward him for weeks. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of decades love, betrayal, and justice all converging in this room. Margaret stood beside me, her presence steady, a quiet reassurance that Richard's foresight would guide us through the chaos ahead. The judge, an older woman with eyes that seemed to pierce through falsehoods as easily as glass, called the session to order. We are here today to address the matter of occupancy and inheritance in the estate of the late Richard Ellaner Burn. Mrs. Ellaner Burn is contesting the actions of secondary occupants who have, according to presented evidence, attempted to displace her unlawfully. Let us begin. Margaret presented the first pieces of evidence. Photographs of my bedroom, my quilt replaced, personal belongings discarded, and handwritten notes of insults left in my absence. The judge's brow furrowed slightly as she reviewed the files. Then came the recordings. Clarice had no idea that her every boast, every insult, and every casual proclamation of dominance had been documented. The audio played clearly. This is my house now. The old lady just lives in my husband's memory. And even that's fading. The courtroom was silent. The words, intended to intimidate, now worked against her. Aaron's face went pale, the first real sign of fear. Margaret's calm voice narrated each piece of evidence with precision, highlighting how every act of emotional displacement, verbal disparagement, and intentional erasure fell under Clause 14b of the estate's trust documentation. This clause, authored by the late Richard Ellaner Burn, explicitly protects Mrs. Ellaner Burn from any involuntary displacement. The law is clear. Any beneficiary acting contrary to the clause forfeits all claims to occupancy and inheritance. Clarice opened her mouth, perhaps to protest, perhaps to argue, but no words came. The evidence was overwhelming. She had assumed she could rewrite reality. But reality, with law and truth as its foundation, refused to be rewritten. Aaron tried to interject. Mom, she's exaggerating. The judge's gaze fell on him. Exaggeration or fact? Young man, are these your own observations? Or simply repeating what your secondary occupant instructed you to say? Silence. Aaron's confidence evaporated like mist in the morning sun. Margaret then presented the lamp, a seemingly ordinary household object. It had contained the voice of a man who had anticipated every scenario, every act of betrayal. Richard's recorded instructions and protective clauses had transformed the brass lamp into an irrefutable witness. The voice echoed through the courtroom, commanding yet warm. The moment Mrs. Ellaner Burn is made unwelcome in her home, verbally, physically, or symbolically, all secondary beneficiaries forfeit their claim. Full ownership transfers to her name with legal authority to remove any resident at will. I could see Clarice's carefully maintained composure crumble. Her lips quivered, her fingers clenched into fists, her entire body radiating disbelief. Aaron sat frozen, his phone forgotten, his usual smug detachment replaced by raw panic. The judge reviewed the documentation again, turning to Clarice and Aaron. Do either of you have any evidence to contradict these findings? Anything that demonstrates Mrs. Burn was, in any way, unwelcome only by misunderstanding or oversight? Clarice shook her head, her voice barely audible. No, Your Honor. Aaron's gaze fell to the floor. He muttered something under his breath, but it was drowned by the weight of the room's silence. Margaret then laid out the final piece of evidence, a record of every attempt to contact me, every plea ignored, and every call for understanding dismissed. Ladies and gentlemen, she said softly but firmly, this is not simply a matter of property. It is a matter of respect, dignity, and the fulfillment of a trust intentionally constructed to prevent such abuses. The judge nodded. It is clear from the documentation and evidence presented that the actions of Clarice and Aaron constitute intentional displacement and verbal disparagement. The clauses in the trust are legally binding and enforceable. Full ownership and occupancy of the property, along with the associated estate, revert solely to Mrs. Ellaner Burn. Time seemed to stop. I felt the tension in the room dissolve, replaced by a quiet, almost surreal calm. Clarice's eyes filled with tears. Aaron's jaw tightened, and Margaret gave me a small, approving nod. The ruling was final. Legal documents were signed. The judge's gavel struck decisively, and the courtroom cleared. Clarice and Aaron were legally required to vacate my home. There was no appeal strong enough to counter decades of foresight, preparation, and documented truth. Outside the courthouse, the air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of winter. I walked slowly, savoring the sensation of justice finally realized. Margaret followed, supportive and quiet, allowing me to absorb the moment fully. I thought of my husband, of the careful planning that had allowed me to reclaim my life. I thought of Natalie, who had been my secret ally throughout this ordeal, and the countless small acts of love that had fortified me. Returning home that evening was surreal. The front door, which had felt like a barrier and a source of fear, now symbolized victory and resilience. I walked through each room, touching familiar surfaces, adjusting the pillows, reclaiming the space that had always been mine. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe fully, without the weight of intrusion or the suffocating presence of cruelty. Clarice and Aaron were gone, forced to confront the consequences of their actions outside my sanctuary. And yet, the most profound realization wasn't just that I had won. It was that life's victories are not measured solely in legal documents or court rulings. They are measured in the quiet confidence of knowing your worth, in the preservation of dignity, in the ability to rise even when the world tries to diminish you. That night, as I sat in my husband's chair, the city lights twinkling through the window, I allowed myself a rare smile. Victory was sweet. Yes, but it was sweeter because it had been earned with patience, intelligence, and unwavering resolve. I had weathered storms of betrayal, endured weeks of emotional displacement, and confronted the arrogance of those who thought they could overwrite a life built with love, foresight, and resilience. And now, standing firmly in the heart of my reclaimed home, I understood a truth that Clarice and Aaron would never grasp. No one can erase a life well lived. Reclaiming home and heart the first morning after the court ruling, the house felt different. It wasn't just the absence of Clarice's heavy presence or the echo of Aaron's detachment, it was the presence of quiet order. A space breathing in sync with me again. I walked through the hallways slowly, my fingers brushing against doorframes I'd once built my life around. The walls, still painted in Clarice's beige, seemed less oppressive now. They were mine again, vessels for memory, for warmth, for the stories that had unfolded here over decades. I started in the living room, my feet sinking into the familiar rug that had once felt like a comforting anchor beneath my bare feet. I removed the artificial candles Clarice had scattered across tables, the overpriced crystals that glimmered with forced energy, and the manifestation journals she had left open like taunts. Instead, I brought out my own mementos, me husband's old clock, a small stack of books we had read together, and the photograph of us at the lake, smiling beneath the summer sun. Each object restored not just the room, but a part of me. For weeks, I had been a ghost in my own home, wandering from couch to kitchen to hallway, feeling the subtle rejection in every gesture Clarice had made. Now, with each book returned to its rightful place, each frame hung on the wall, the air seemed lighter, the light warmer. Natalie was the first to notice. She arrived with shy steps, clutching the small pillow fabric she had saved. "Grandma," she whispered, "the house feels happy again." I smiled, lifting her onto my lap as she rested her head against my shoulder. Her small hands pressed the fabric into mine, and I held it close, breathing in the faint scent of cotton and lavender. "It's ours again," I whispered. "All of it. Together." We moved through the house. We discovered things Clarice had overlooked or discarded. My old teacups carefully hidden in the pantry. A set of embroidery threads I had forgotten existed. And even my husband's old records stacked neatly on a shelf. Natalie's eyes widened as she picked up each treasure, understanding, even at 9, that these were pieces of history. By mid-morning, I had begun the task of reorganizing the bedroom room that had been dubbed the rebirth suite. My quilt, now restored to the bed, smelled faintly of cedar and memories. The white and gold throw pillows Clarice had insisted upon were removed, replaced by soft, familiar linens. The room no longer felt like a curated Instagram post. It felt like home. I paused at the nightstand, the brass lamp still in its original place. Its base, engraved with the silver disc and the hidden claws of the trust, reminded me of the quiet strength my husband had always imparted. It was more than a lamp, it was a symbol of foresight, of preparation, of love protecting us even from beyond the grave. I plugged it in, letting the soft glow fill the room. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to breathe fully without fear. The next day, I invited Margaret back, not for legal counsel, but for companionship. She had been my anchor throughout the ordeal, and I wanted to share the quiet victory. We sat in the kitchen, sipping tea from my favorite porcelain cups. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the small imperfections and the comforting familiarity of my home. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Margaret said softly, her eyes scanning the restored rooms. "It's ours," I replied, a smile tugging at the corners of my lips. "And more than that, it's mine. I get to decide what stays, what goes, and how it feels." We spent the day organizing files, letters, and photographs that had been scattered during Clarice's reign. Each item returned to its rightful place felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. By evening, the house felt alive, aggy, not with the noise of brunches or forced energy, but with the soft hum of normalcy, of lived-in comfort, and the quiet laughter of a grandmother and her granddaughter. That night, Natalie curled up beside me on the sofa, the pillow fabric pressed against her cheek. "Grandma," she murmured, "will we always be able to stay here?" I hugged her tightly, feeling the warmth of her small body against mine. "Yes, darling, this is our home. Always." Over the next few days, I began reaching out to friends I had neglected, reconnecting with neighbors, and slowly rebuilding the small community that had once surrounded me. Each conversation, each visit, reminded me that life didn't end with betrayal or cruelty, it continued. And it could be beautiful again. I also took steps to ensure that no one could ever threaten my home or dignity again. The locks would change not because I feared, but because I deserved the security of peace. Security cameras were installed in discreet corners, not for surveillance, but for protection, and I began cataloging all the important documents, contracts, and heirlooms, ensuring they were safeguarded for the future. Aaron, my son, eventually approached me with tentative steps. He had been stunned by the court's decision, and though there was tension, there was also remorse. "Mom," he said softly, I didn't realize how wrong I was." I studied him for a long moment. His voice trembled, and I saw the reflection of our family in his eyes, flawed, human, capable of both hurt and redemption. "It's not too late to start making amends," I said, choosing not to dwell on anger. "But it starts with respect and honesty." He nodded, swallowing hard. "You'll do better, I promise." Meanwhile, I began turning my attention outward, thinking about the countless women who, like me, had been quietly erased, minimized, or dismissed. Using a portion of the inheritance, I established a foundation called Women Who Were Erased. The organization offered legal counsel, emergency housing, and emotional support to elderly women navigating family betrayal, neglect, and displacement. I wanted it to be quiet at first, under the radar. These women didn't need fanfare, they needed action, advocacy, and validation. I visited shelters, spoke with legal experts, and met women who reminded me of myself years ago. Each story reaffirmed my belief that dignity, once taken, could be reclaimed not through anger alone, but through calculated action, foresight, and community. In the evenings, Natalie and I often sat together, her small hands wrapped around a warm mug of cocoa, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the city outside our windows. She would whisper little observations about the house where the light felt right, which books belonged together, and how certain corners made her feel safe. I listened, learning again how even the smallest perspectives could transform a space into a home. One particularly rainy night, I stood by the window, watching the droplets trace lines down the glass. The city outside was a blur of lights, movement, and distant sounds. Yet here, inside, there was stillness. I thought about Clarice, about the cruelty and entitlement that had sought to erase me. And I realized something profound. Their attempts to diminish me had only strengthened my resolve. The house, once a battleground, had become a sanctuary, and in reclaiming it, I had reclaimed more than property. I had reclaimed self-respect, agency, and peace. By the end of the week, the final traces of Clarice's influence were gone. The rebirth suite, now properly my bedroom once again, reflected comfort, love, and history. The living room, free of intrusive decor and alien energy, hummed with quiet life. And in the kitchen, the note from Natalie remained, glittered in crooked letters. Grandma 1, Mean Lady 0. I smiled every time I saw it, not because it was a victory over anyone, but because it reminded me of what truly mattered: family, legacy, and the quiet strength to endure and rise. That night, as I sat in my armchair, the lamp casting a warm, familiar glow, I thought about the future. It wasn't about vengeance, wealth, or dominance. It was about building a life that honored the past while embracing the possibilities ahead. And for the first time in a long while, I felt the freedom to do just that. Because no matter what anyone else tried, no matter the power they wielded or the illusions they cast, some truths could not be erased. Love, memory, and the courage to reclaim what was always yours. Rising from the shadows, the morning sun filtered softly through the lace curtains, spilling golden light across the living room. The house, once heavy with tension and fear, now vibrated with quiet life. I moved deliberately, sipping tea from my favorite cup, letting the warmth seep into my hands and calm my mind. After weeks of upheaval, of legal battles and emotional turmoil, I felt a sense of equilibrium that I hadn't known in years. The foundation, women who were erased, had become more than a project. It was a mission. I spent hours on the phone, connecting with lawyers, social workers, and volunteers who shared the vision of empowering women who had been silenced or displaced. Each story I heard resonated deeply, reminding me of the nights I had cried quietly alone, wondering if anyone would ever stand with me. Now, I had the means, the support, and the voice to ensure no woman would have to endure that in silence. Margaret came by mid-morning, carrying a box of supplies for our first workshop. "Ellaner, are you ready for this?" she asked, her tone both amused and supportive. I nodded, feeling the thrill of anticipation mingling with a hint of nervousness. "I am. It's time to turn pain into action." We spent the day arranging the space. A small room in a community center donated for our first workshop. Chairs were lined in neat rows, pamphlets organized on tables, and a few plants brought in for warmth. Every detail mattered. It had to feel welcoming, not clinical, empowering, not intimidating. As women began arriving, I noticed a mix of hesitation and curiosity in their eyes. Many carried stories I knew all too well: eviction, betrayal by family, financial manipulation, emotional neglect. Some were elderly, their spines slightly curved from years of carrying burdens in silence. Others were younger, eyes wide with both fear and hope, unsure if this was a place where their voices would be heard. I greeted each woman personally, shaking hands, hugging where appropriate, and letting them know that they were safe here. I shared my own story, not the sensationalized version that could fill newspapers, but the raw, honest truth, that even when life seems to strip you of everything, you can reclaim your dignity, your space, and your agency. By midday, the room buzzed with conversation. Women exchanged stories, laughter punctuating moments of shared pain. Some wept quietly, some spoke fiercely, and some simply listened, absorbing the courage in the room. I sat on the edge of the stage, watching the transformation unfold, feeling a profound sense of purpose settle over me like a warm cloak. Natalie, curious and eager to help, had set up a small corner with coloring sheets and activity books for children whose mothers or grandmothers were attending. She moved gracefully among the little ones, her presence calm and reassuring, showing me that even at 9, she understood the importance of service and empathy. The afternoon was devoted to workshops led by volunteers, legal experts explaining rights and protections, social workers providing mental health resources, and women like me sharing their personal journeys. I took the stage for a brief talk, my voice steady but infused with emotion. Every woman in this room, I said, looking across the circle, has faced challenges that were never hers to bear alone. But you are not alone. Your voice matters. Your story matters. And together, we will build a network of support, strength, and dignity that cannot be ignored or taken from us. Applause rippled through the room, some hesitant at first, then more confident. I felt tears prick my eyes, not of sadness, but of profound pride and relief. This was the moment I had longed for, turning my struggles into a beacon for others. After the workshop, as the women mingled and shared contact information, I found a quiet moment to sit with Margaret. I never imagined it could feel this alive, I confessed, watching the laughter and camaraderie in the room. It's because you turn your pain into purpose. Margaret replied softly. You've built something that will outlive the hurt. Evening came, and the sun dipped behind the horizon, casting long shadows across the house. Back at home, Natalie and I sat on the porch, sipping hot chocolate. The neighborhood hummed with the quiet sounds of life, dogs barking in the distance, the occasional car passing by, children laughing. Grandma, Natalie said, leaning her head on my shoulder, I think the women you're helping, they are like superheroes. Just like you. I laughed softly, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. Maybe we all have a little superhero inside us. I said, we just need a reason to let it shine. As the weeks turned into months, the foundation flourished. Women who had once felt invisible began standing taller, reclaiming homes, businesses, and personal dignity. Letters arrived from women who had attended the workshops, sharing updates. One had successfully contested an eviction, another had reunited with a daughter after years of estrangement, and another had started a small home business, empowered to earn independently. In parallel, my personal life began to stabilize. Aaron made consistent efforts to rebuild his relationship with me and with Natalie, while trust was slow to rebuild. The small gesture as the occasional phone call, helping with grocery shopping, attending Natalie's school events were meaningful. I forgave, not because the past was erased, but because holding on to anger would only hinder the life I was working to rebuild. Clarice, meanwhile, faded from our lives entirely. Her attempts to appeal or reclaim any semblance of influence failed, and eventually, she ceased contact. In her absence, the house felt lighter, freer, unburdened by her manipulations. I found myself enjoying simple pleasures again, cooking favorite meals, tending to the garden, and listening to my husband's old records while sorting through photographs. I discovered a new rhythm, one that balanced responsibilities with the quiet joy of living. One rainy afternoon, while organizing the attic, I stumbled upon an old box of letters my husband had written during our early years of marriage. His handwriting, careful and deliberate, transported me back to a time of hope, love, and simplicity. Reading through them, I felt his presence guiding me, reminding me that resilience is born from love, and that life, no matter how turbulent, can always be rebuilt. Natalie often accompanied me on these attic explorations, her curiosity insatiable. She would ask endless questions about my youth, my adventures with her grandfather, and the stories behind each artifact. These moments became precious rituals, weaving threads of family, history, and memory into the fabric of our renewed lives. By the end of the year, Women Who Were Erased had become a recognized organization within the community. Local media covered our workshops, highlighting success stories and the empowerment of women who had been marginalized. Despite the attention, I remained focused on the work itself, letting the results speak louder than any headline could. Through it all, I had learned a crucial lesson. Life does not owe you fairness, nor does it always reward patience with immediate relief. But it does offer opportunities for reclamation, for rebuilding, and for rediscovering joy amidst adversity. And in this process, I had found something invaluable, a renewed sense of identity, a purpose that extended beyond myself, and the unshakable knowledge that even after betrayal, displacement, or grief, it is possible to rise and to help others rise alongside you. That night, as I tucked Natalie into bed, her small hand gripping mine, I whispered, "Never forget, darling, you have the power to reclaim your world, no matter what obstacles appear." She smiled sleepily, her eyes already heavy with dreams, and I knew she understood in ways even her young mind couldn't fully articulate. Alone in the quiet of my restored home, I sank into my armchair, listening to the gentle rhythm of the house settling around me. The lamp's warm glow bathed the room in comfort, shadows dancing across familiar walls. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt wholly present, not defined by the wrongs of others, but by my own choices, resilience, and the life I was actively shaping. The journey was far from over, and challenges would inevitably arise, but I no longer feared them. I had discovered a deeper truth. Strength is not born from absence of fear, but from the courage to act in spite of it. And so, with the soft hum of life surrounding me, I allowed myself a moment of stillness, a quiet gratitude for survival, reclamation, and the unwavering spirit that had brought me here. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new triumphs, and new stories to share, but tonight, I simply sat in the knowledge that I had risen from the shadows and claimed the life I deserved. Storms on the horizon. Winter arrived quietly that year, brushing the city with its icy fingers, leaving frost on windows and a hush over the streets. Inside my home, warmth came not from the heater alone, but from the life I had painstakingly rebuilt. Yet, even amidst comfort, I sensed the subtle undercurrents of change, a reminder that peace is often temporary and that growth, no matter how steady, invites new storms. The foundation, women who were erased, had grown faster than I could have imagined. Our workshops had multiplied, and the demand for mentorship, legal aid, and emotional support had skyrocketed. I had assembled a team of passionate women, each bringing unique skills to the table. Lawyers, social workers, writers, and even psychologists. The energy was intoxicating, but it also demanded more of me than I had anticipated. One Monday morning, Margaret burst into my office, excitement radiating from her. "Ellaner, you won't believe this. A national news outlet wants to feature our foundation. They are calling it a movement that's reshaping women's advocacy in Texas." I blinked, a mix of pride and apprehension stirring within me. "That's incredible, Margaret, but exposure can be a double-edged sword. It will bring attention, yes, but also scrutiny." Margaret shrugged, her ever-pragmatic demeanor showing through. "We can't hide forever. This is our chance to make an even bigger impact. Besides, I know you thrive under pressure." I laughed softly, but her words rang true. Thriving under pressure had become my mantra over the past few years. And yet, there was an unease I couldn't shake, a quiet, nagging sense that the storms of life, though quieter now, was still gathering beyond the horizon. The first challenge arrived in the form of bureaucracy. Funding applications became a maze of paperwork, complicated forms, and endless meetings with officials who seemed intent on slowing progress at every turn. I found myself spending long nights navigating red tape, often fueled by nothing more than coffee and sheer determination. Meanwhile, Clarice, though largely absent, attempted a subtle return. An anonymous email hinted that she was spreading false rumors about the foundation, claiming it was a scam designed to exploit vulnerable women. The message, though carefully worded, hit me with a pang of old fear. For a moment, I questioned whether all the progress we had made could be tainted by her manipulations. I took a deep breath and reminded myself of the truth. Our work speaks for itself. I instructed Margit to prepare a transparent report on our finances and operations, ensuring every detail could withstand scrutiny. Integrity, I reminded myself, was the armor that no rumor could pierce. As the foundation grew, so did the emotional weight of the stories we encountered. Each woman we helped carried a trauma unique to her experience, yet the thread of erasure and betrayal tied them together. Listening to these stories became both my strength and my vulnerability. I realized that to lead effectively, I needed to maintain balance, give support without losing myself in the weight of their pain. One particularly heavy day, a woman named Evelyn came to our office. She had recently escaped an abusive household, had children with her, and nowhere to go. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of exhaustion, fear, and a desperate hope I recognized immediately. "I don't know where to start," she whispered, clutching a worn backpack. "I've lost everything. I just want to survive." I took her hands in mine, the warmth of human connection bridging the chasm of her despair. "Start here," I said gently. "You're safe now. We'll help you find stability, resources, and a way forward, one step at a time." That evening, as Natalie helped me organize care packages for women like Evelyn, she looked up at me with her usual clarity. "Grandma, you're like a lighthouse. Even when the storm is scary, you show people the way." Her words, simple yet profound, reminded me why every sleepless night, every battle with bureaucracy, every confrontation with fear was worth it. Yet life outside the foundation continued to demand attention. Erin had been trying, slowly but steadily, to rebuild trust and connection. Natalie, now more aware of family dynamics, sometimes expressed confusion about her father's inconsistent presence. I handled these moments with care, encouraging honest conversations while shielding her from unnecessary stress. One evening, while Erin and I discussed plans for the next workshop, Natalie asked a question that caught us off guard. "Grandma, do you think Dad really understands how much he hurt us?" I paused, searching for words that would balance honesty with hope. Sometimes, people don't fully understand the pain they cause, but what matters is whether they are willing to change and make amends. That choice, that's what defines them now. Erin nodded quietly, a shadow of remorse in his eyes. I hoped he would follow through, not for my sake, but for the healing of our little family. As the foundation expanded, I also realized the importance of delegation. Margit had become indispensable, not just as a helper but as a strategic partner. Together, we trained volunteers to lead workshops independently, ensuring that our impact could grow without my constant presence. It was both freeing and humbling to witness women taking ownership, sharing stories, and inspiring others. Then came the storm that tested every lesson I had learned. A local politician, threatened by the growing influence of our organization, attempted to halt one of our larger events under the guise of zoning violations and permit issues. The legal battle was exhausting and tense, pushing me to my limits. Sleepless nights, endless phone calls, and meetings with lawyers drained me physically and emotionally. But I refused to back down. Every challenge became a lesson in perseverance, in turning fear into action. I rallied our supporters, organized petitions, and leveraged local media to ensure the truth prevailed. In the end, the event proceeded as planned, a testament to resilience and collective power. Amidst these battles, personal growth remained central. I found myself reflecting deeply on my journey with betrayals, the losses, the small victories, and the profound transformations. I recognized that true strength was not merely in survival, but in embracing vulnerability, sharing experiences, and allowing oneself to be both teacher and student of life. One quiet evening, while reviewing plans for a national seminar, I realized how far I had come. From a woman pushed to the edge by betrayal, silenced by family, and nearly erased by circumstance, I had transformed into someone who could inspire, empower, and protect. The foundation was no longer just a mission, it was a legacy in the making. Even as new challenges arose, I felt a confidence that had been absent for decades. I understood that storms would come, but with preparation, support, and unwavering belief in one's purpose, even the fiercest tempests could be weathered. That night, as I tucked Natalie into bed, She whispered sleepily. Grandma, I want to help too. I want to be like you when I grow up. I kissed her forehead, feeling a surge of love and responsibility. You already are, darling. By being kind, courageous, and empathetic, you're already making the world better. Never forget that. Alone afterward, I sat by the window, watching the rain fall softly against the glass. I thought of the women we had helped, the battles we had fought, and the countless stories still waiting to be heard. The road ahead would be long, but for the first time in years, I felt ready not just to face it, but to thrive amidst it. And so, as the city slept under the quiet rhythm of rain, I allowed myself a moment of reflection. For all the storms, all the betrayals, and all the heartache, life had offered me a chance to rise, to lead, and to create a legacy that would endure beyond my own lifetime. Legacy of the Heart Spring arrived that year, painting the city with bursts of color, and with it, a sense of renewal that mirrored my own journey. The foundation, women who were erased, had become more than a mission, it was now a movement. We had expanded to multiple cities across Texas, forming partnerships with schools, community centers, and even local governments. Each success brought new hope, not just to the women we helped, but to me, reminding me that life's purpose often emerges from the ashes of our struggles. Family, too, had begun to heal in unexpected ways. Aaron, once distant and consumed by regret, had made consistent efforts to rebuild trust. He attended family counseling, participated in our foundation events, and, most importantly, listened to Natalie. Over time, I witnessed a quiet transformation in him, a willingness to own his mistakes and actively work toward repair. Natalie, growing more self-aware and compassionate, often spoke at our workshops alongside me, sharing her own experiences with resilience and forgiveness. It amazed me to see her confidence bloom, her once timid voice now strong and clear, guiding other young women toward empowerment. One Saturday afternoon, as we prepared for a community gala celebrating the Foundation's 5-year anniversary, I found a moment of quiet reflection. Standing by the window, I watched volunteers bustling about, their laughter and chatter filling the room with energy. The air was thick with anticipation, but also with a sense of accomplishment. This wasn't just my journey, it was ours. A collective story of courage, hope, and unwavering perseverance. Aaron approached, placing a hand on my shoulder. Ellaner, he said softly, I know I can never erase the past, but I want you to know I'm proud of you. Of us. I smiled, the warmth of genuine reconciliation washing over me. We've come a long way, I replied, and it's never too late to keep moving forward. The gala began with speeches, highlighting the incredible stories of women whose lives had been transformed. Each story echoed resilience and courage to rise despite betrayal, abandonment, and systemic challenges. Tears flowed freely in the audience, and I felt a profound connection to every woman in the room. Their triumphs were my triumphs, their pain a reminder of why I had dedicated my life to this mission. Later, as the event transitioned into a celebration, I found myself pulled aside by Margaret. Ellaner, look, she said, handing me a framed article from a national magazine. The headline read, Ellaner Bennett, From Silence to Strength, the Woman Who Redefined Empowerment. I held it in my hands, my fingers trembling slightly. It wasn't fame I sought, nor recognition, but seeing our work acknowledged on such a scale reaffirmed that perseverance, integrity, and love could indeed create ripples that extend far beyond oneself. That night, after the gala, I sat with Natalie on the porch, the cool spring breeze brushing against our faces. Grandma, she whispered, do you think we've really healed? I hugged her close, the scent of her hair grounding me in the present. Healing isn't about forgetting the pain, sweetheart. It's about taking the lessons and growing stronger. We've healed because we've faced our truths, embraced each other, and chosen love over resentment. She nodded, her eyes reflecting both understanding and hope. I think I get it now, and I want to help more people. Like you. You already are. Darling, I said, feeling a swell of pride. Every act of kindness, Every moment of courage, that's how you continue the legacy. In the weeks that followed, the foundation continued to thrive, taking on larger projects, expanding mentorship programs, and advocating for policy changes to protect vulnerable women. We had built a community that was unshakable, rooted in trust, compassion, and accountability. Even as our public impact grew, I cherished the quieter, victorious phone calls from women who had found safe housing, the letters from mothers who finally felt heard, and the hugs from daughters like Natalie, who saw in me a reflection of strength, resilience, and love. One evening, Aaron and I sat together on the porch, sipping tea. "Ellaner," he said thoughtfully, "do you ever regret anything?" I considered for a moment, looking out at the city skyline, lights twinkling like scattered stars. "Regret?" I whispered. "Not really. Every heartbreak, every betrayal, every sleepless night brought me here, to this moment, to this life. And if anything, I am grateful for the lessons, for the people who challenged me, and for the chance to create something lasting." Aaron reached across, taking my hand. "I'm grateful too. For you, for what you've built, and for showing me what courage really looks like." The seasons continue to change, each one bringing new opportunities, challenges, and growth. And though I knew life would never be without trials, I also knew that the foundation we had created and the love we had nurtured would endure far beyond any hardship. In the quiet of my study, I penned the final notes of my memoir, recounting decades of struggle, heartbreak, triumph, and legacy. I wanted every word to echo truth, to capture the essence of resilience, and to serve as a guide for those who might feel silenced or erased. As I closed the notebook, I felt a sense of completion, not of life ending, but of a chapter fulfilled. I looked at Natalie, now asleep on the sofa, and whispered softly, "We've come so far, my darling, and the journey is just beginning." Outside, the night was calm, the stars shimmering above like silent witnesses to the path we had traveled. I felt a deep peace, knowing that love, courage, and determination had carried us through storms that once seemed insurmountable. And in that peace, I found hope not just for myself, but for every woman who would walk through our doors, every daughter learning the power of her voice, and every life waiting to be reclaimed. The world would continue to turn, challenges would arise, and storms would come, but we had learned to rise, to persevere, and to leave behind a legacy of strength, compassion, and unyielding hope. And in the end, that legacy, that unwavering flame of love and courage, was all that truly mattered.